Alright, so this is part 5 of Game-Styled Logic with Fry and Bacon Studios. And we're going to look at, we've looked at the Boolean and we've looked at the text attribute. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the integer type. Now integer type is basically a whole number. You can't put decimal places. See, I'll try to put 2 point. You can, it won't give it to you. It looks at whole numbers. It has to be numbers, you know, whole numbers. Can't be any decimal places in any way. And so what we're going to do is let's look at it in a very conventional type of situation that we would use an integer for, and that's for a score attribute, a score variable. So let's just go ahead and call this score, and let's set the default back to 0. And we're going to go into our actor. Let's go ahead into our display actor, and let's just tell it to display the score attribute. So let's just go ahead and get it to game and display score. Alright, so there we go. It's going to display our score. And let's go ahead into our actor, and we can get rid of this. And we'll just, I want to keep this code, so we'll just shut that off for right now. And let's go ahead and just make a new rule, an if statement. And we'll say if actor receives event, touch is pressed, let's change the score attribute. So we're going to come in here, we're going to drag in a change variable or attribute behavior. And we're going to go to change attribute, and we want to change game.score to, now here's we start getting into how you add and subtract from variables. So what we want to do is when we're changing the attribute, and let's say that if we wanted to just change it to 1, we could type in 1. Now the problem with this is that every time we touch, it's just going to change it to 1. It's going to be 1 all the time. That's all it's going to do. It's going to change game.score to 1. So when we want to add, what we have to do is address the variable itself. And what that does is it gives us its count already. So we're going to say we want to change game.score to game.score. So whatever number was already in there, it's going to add 1 to it. So we're going to do plus 1. So this way it keeps adding to it, and it doesn't just change it to a number. So let's go ahead and look at it. And we've got 0, and we're going to press it, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so it's adding up, it's taking the game.score, whatever number it is, and then it's doing exactly what we're telling it to do. Take the amount that's in there and add 1 to it. So when it's 0 plus 1, it's 1. When it's 2, when it's 1 plus 1 is 2, etc., etc. So you can see how this basic variable works. Now, if we wanted to, we could do backwards. So let's go ahead in here and let's change it to -1. And then how we would do this is we would go into the attribute itself, and let's change the default to 10. Let's give it an amount. Alright, so that when we start with 10, and every time we press, we're going to take 1 away. And so we can see how we're starting to do the basics of logic and adding math and all that kind of stuff. And that's just a basic how you can use an integer. You can use it for anything that you don't need decimal places for. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at real attributes. So let's go ahead and let's make 2 real attributes, which real attributes allow us to use decimal places. So let's go ahead and make 1 more. And this is a very common thing that's done in any game. It's tracking X and Y positions of the mouse. So let's say mouse X and mouse Y. All right, so we have our 2, and this is going to give us decimal places, which is, you know, you're going to see the mouse deals in decimal places. So let's do something a little different here. Let's actually get this actor to follow the other actor around. So we're going to come in here, and we don't need this anymore. And let's make a rule. Let's make a rule and say when touch is pressed, constrain attribute. And by using a constrain attribute, what we're doing is we're establishing a direct link. In other words, the change attribute happens kind of once. You know, it's you touch it, and then it changes the attribute to that, whatever that number is at that time. If you use a constrain attribute, there's a constant link that's established, so that as long as touch is pressed, no matter when we drag and move that actors around, its position will be continually updated to our variables. So we're going to constrain the x position of this actor or of the mouse to mouse x. I'm sorry. Yeah, game mouse x. And then we're going to connect it. So we're going to look for the variables relatable to the device. And these are the variables that are inside the device. So you got the accelerometer, touches, screen, all that kind of stuff. So these are where the variables are that we get a hold of those variables, and then we're going to constrain it to the mouse position x. And then we're going to use another constrain, and we're going to constrain game mouse y to device, the mouse, which is the same as a touch, okay, position y. So now when this is pressed, okay, when this is pressed, it's going to report the mouse position, okay, to these attributes. So now the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to use 2 more constrain attributes. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually constrain the actor itself to the mouse position, this actor that we're moving around. So we're going to do a couple things here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to say actor 1 position x constrained to the mouse. And y self. So we're getting to the self variables, and we're constraining them to the device variable. Okay, so what we're doing is taking this position, which controls these variables, control the position, and you can see their real attributes, the position of the x and y location of this actor, and we're saying to, when you're pressed, we're saying these variables link to these variables, which is the mouse position. So we're saying change these variables to these variables. And the same thing down here, we're saying, okay, now take these outside variables and constrain them to the mouse. So both of these, all these variables here are being basically constrained by the mouse variables, and they're being altered and affected. So the reason why we have to go to external game variables is because without unlocking actors, if we want this actor to follow where we're going to move this actor around, then we need to give it those locations. We need to get it to identify what those positions are. So we're going to do it with external. We're going to do it with external variables. Let's get rid of that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to say, we don't even need a rule. We can just say constrain attribute, and then we're going to do a constrain attribute. Constrain attribute self position x to game mouse x and self position y to game mouse y. All right, so now what will happen is when we press that other actor, this one is going to latch onto it, and it's going to follow it around, is how this should work. So let's just look in our physics, and everything's movable. We need to make sure we have movable checked. And they should be. I don't believe I turned them off. And let's just go ahead and preview this. And we push this, and we see that they're linked together, and they're following each other around. They're locked. And you wouldn't get this perfect centering all the time if you didn't have decimal places. And I'll show you. Let's just take a look at. Go into the display actor, and let's get it to display the position of, let's just say, the X position. So let's go ahead and get it to display its display self position X. And let's go ahead and just change the color so we can see it. And since it's decimal places, let's just turn the size down. All right, so let's go ahead and do this again. And so when we press, we can see how the numbers are in decimal places. Okay, if you didn't have those decimal places, you'd get an offset. You wouldn't be able to lock these two actors in perfect symmetry with each other. It would always look like one of them is a little bit lagging behind, because it would be missing the decimal places and kind of jumping to every whole number. So this is why we use the real attributes, so that we can get a decimal place. Now the code that I just wrote for this is, anybody who knows anything really about GameSalad, it's not very it's not very efficient. There are other ways to do code. There are other ways to accomplish what I just did. And actually in GameSalad, when you start to understand logic and start to understand how the attributes work and how you add things and how you do vector angles and more complicated stuff, you start to really be able to refine your code, and you'll find that there are there's 20 different ways to do something, and the goal is to find the most comprehensive way in which all your logic can work together efficiently. And so to be able to really program your logic efficiently in GameSalad, you really have to know all the ins and outs of the different ways to write the code, so that when you're mapping out your game, you can build a structure or a system that works efficiently together by incorporating the right methodologies together. And so we see here how we've been through pretty much all the attributes. Like I said, angle is just basically for 0 to 360. You would use that in incorporating an angle. And the index does pretty much the same thing as an integer. It's whole numbers up and down. So those are the basic variables in GameSalad. Kind of how they work and why we use particular types of variables. Just to give you a basic understanding in logic. And coming up in the next couple tutorials, we're going to look at tables, which is basically a storehouse for variables, and we're going to explain why it's good to use a table when we do that kind of stuff. And we're going to look at a few other things in relationship to logic, and show you what I talked about there being different ways to do things, and how to use operators to make things more efficient in your code. I'm going to do kind of a simple demonstration to demonstrate that. So part 6, that's what you're going to be looking for. So I hope this helps, and enjoy the tutorials, Frying Bacon Studios.